Hi there. You heard me say to you before that it used to be an MFCC, which is now an MFT, because it stood for Marriage and Family Counseling. Now it's an MFT, which is Marriage and Family Therapy. The reason being that most people just don't want to work with kids. They're just too hard to work with. There is nothing more difficult to face than an out-of-control child. One who's angry, one who's despondent, one who's depressed, one who's doing things that you don't expect children to do, especially when they're a lot littler than you. They're supposed to behave. They're supposed to do what you tell them to. And so mental health issues with children are very, very difficult to work with and to understand. If you had taken before my classes in 142 and 143, the psychosocial rehabilitation, you would have had questions about when you're a case manager and somebody gives you a hard to handle child to take care of, who's the first people that you contact? Who do you want on your team? And almost to a fault, nobody ever answered that the schools are where you start. And I'm going to tell you that you make a big mistake if you do not understand that starting with 18 months of age, or even younger sometimes, you must involve the public schools. You have to. It's the only way to have complete access to programs for children, especially ones that are paid for to meet the needs of those with special problems, whether it be mental retardation, whether it be mental illness, whether it be long-term illness, whether it be any other kind of learning disability that you might face working with a child. So where do you go? Where do you go to get the help? There are some terms that I'm going to give you, and you're going to see them again, most likely on your final. And so I'd like you to start paying attention to them. And the first one I want to talk about is, well, let me give you a little bit about my background. I started off after undergraduate school of having a wonderful major in sociology, which I dearly loved and I would do again, but it's totally worthless because you don't get a job as a sociologist. It just doesn't happen. So I took this wonderful job in the State School for Delinquent Girls, the cream of the state of Oregon, and I was a physical education teacher. And I learned that I really, really liked that kind of interaction with young people. Really enjoyed it because in PE the kids talk to you. You play with them, they talk to you, they tell you things. And that's what I found to be my passion. So I've taught grades K through graduate school, postgraduate school actually. And I've been a school administrator. And I was a school administrator for the California Youth Authority in Stockton, principal of one of the institutions at OH Close. So I've had considerable experience working in the public schools, Turlock High School, head counselor, school principal, school assistant principal, was in charge of a special ed school. So when I start talking to you about children's issues, I've been there and I've done that. I do it again. I love working with children. And they continue to amaze me and stir me and stay in my life, and I wouldn't change places with anybody for what I've gotten to do. But there's some things you need to know about how to be a professional and work with children. It's different than it is with adults. There aren't lockup facilities for kids. You can't put them away in a mental hospital. That isn't what happens. So you have a choice. You either use your insurance and pay for mental health help, or you go through the school system to get the help and have it paid for under PL 94-142, which is the law of the handicap from 1974, or the reauthorization, which came about in 2008 and is now called IDEA or IDEA. And those things you need to know. And there's a copy, as you know, on Start Here of IDEA, and I expect you to go over it. I expect you to be familiar with the terms that are in there and what they mean to the children with whom you may work. So as I say that, it sounds kind of complicated, and it's not. And if I'd had an opportunity, I would have taken you on field trips this summer, but during the summer, you don't have IEPs and student study teams meeting like you do during a normal school year. So if we do this adventure again, you'll have an opportunity to sit in on those actual types of activities so that you can see what really happens to a child from the start of the process of referral to when they get through with whatever they're going to do. They have the right to stay in services up until age 25. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of those. You heard Deborah Roth and you heard Sue Smalling both talk about some things called plans. And there's a couple of them, two of them that I want to talk about today. One is a 504 plan, and that's Section 504 of IDEA. And one of them is an IEP, which is an individual educational plan, which is crucial, absolutely crucial, and illegal. Both of them are legal documents, and both of them must be obeyed by federal law. So they're a mandate. It all started in the state of Pennsylvania. A group of parents was tired of the fact that their children who had some sort of disability were not allowed to go to school. They weren't allowed to attend. You didn't find special education classes back in the early 70s. They weren't there. You didn't know those kids existed. If they were kids with certain disabilities, they were put in institutions and left there. I can remember visiting the Sunshine State Hospital in Florida that had kids that the moment that they were born, they were removed from their parents without ever having a chance to live in a family and put there, and parents would visit them maybe once a year if then, but they were left to be institutionalized. We don't do that anymore. The parents won in Pennsylvania, and therein came PL 94-142, which set the tone for children with disabilities. It set it for adults also, but especially in this class, we're taking a look at it for children. So I want you to know what IDEA is, and I want you to know what those other two things are too. 504 policy. Let me give you one other thing. Let's talk about a student study team. Student study teams, or SSTs as they're called, for the most part, are all across the United States. That's not true with the Youth Authority. They call it something different, but that's okay. We're going to call it the student study team. This is a group of people. It can be school counselors, school teachers, school administrators, parents, next door neighbors. It could be uncles, aunts, grandparents who meet to talk about a child and to talk about a child's issues or problems. You come together and the teachers have reports for what's going on in the classroom, and everybody else that's there gives information about what they have seen with this child and why they feel there's a need for referral for some purpose, whatever it might be. Now that's not true in the little ones, and you heard Deborah talk about that. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the little ones because the autism spectrum we haven't seen much of in the new rules from the DSM-5, which is now coming out. And I don't want to talk about that until we can actually see it in print and read what the new regulations have to say. So we may come back to that. I've left some room at the end of the class maybe to see if by August we have more information. So a student study team comes together on a school site, or it could be in an office at the County Office of Education, and all of these people come together as a team, and they're presented all this information on a child, and then the team talks about what are the needs of that child. You know, what should happen here? Should the school psychologist be asked to test them? Should they be assessed? Is it academic? Is it behavioral? What are the issues? What's going on? And then that team makes a recommendation of what they would like to have go into place next. Let's say you have a student who is ADD, ADHD, one of the places where we force children to go because we don't know what else to do with them. It's just a great dumping ground without a whole lot of definition for what that topic is. It is not considered a disability per se. It is not mandated under the IEP, which is the individual educational plan, but it is allowed for under a 504 policy. The 504 policy that I want you to read and know what it specifies is for like long-term illnesses, like let's say cystic fibrosis. You have a student who may go to Stanford. It has a wonderful cystic fibrosis program, and they have to leave school because they're virtually dying at the moment. All of their educational resources come from their local schools, and it is sent through a teacher on the Stanford site where they stay in school while they're being hospitalized. That goes into a 504 policy. Diabetes may be one of those. ADHD and ADD are certainly part of that process. It is not a mental disability. It is simply a child who has behavioral issues that are not controllable so easily just by saying, hey, stop what you're doing. And there is nothing more annoying than a child who wanders around a classroom and makes noise and disturbs everybody. And everybody wants them medicated. And the schools often think that they can force you to medicate that child. And that's not necessarily true. It may be recommended by the student study team that it be evaluated for that. And that's important for you to go back and look at. That's on the student study team. When a plan comes up, it's signed by all of the people who attended these meetings. Everything that goes in place for that child in the classroom, a behavioral plan, an academic plan, all of that. And that must be followed. It's a pain for a teacher. Picture yourself with 3 or 4 kids who are ADD, ADHD in a classroom of 30 students, and picture yourself with maybe 3 or 4 kids who are ESL kids who English is not their first language. Picture then having somebody who is mentally disturbed in that class also, somebody who is on an active IEP. All of those kinds of things that go into place are a part of what you consider in the treatment plan. So what I recommend highly to you is that you take a look at that policy and examine, what you think should happen with the SST and a 504 plan. Please read that information. The next one I want to talk about is the IEP, the Individual Educational Plan. This is a plan where the recommendation may be made by the student study team that somebody has a learning disability or that somebody is emotionally disturbed. Not conduct disorder, but emotionally disturbed. There is a difference. And mentally ill does not necessarily mean ED. It means emotionally disturbed. But it's a label that stays with you, a legal label, and you must be very, very careful with that kind of label. The military will not accept you, and a lot of jobs will not employ you because they see you as mentally ill. So we don't just throw those titles around and let somebody have to survive and live with them. So what happens is the school psychologist arranges with the parents to sign forms requesting formal assessments and testing. Mrs. Smalling talked to you about that as a school psychologist, and she showed you a couple of the tests and things. Every disability that you can have has some sort of assessment policy or process, a form or whatever. You can have a huge test bank, and lots of times you'll give kids a dozen tests, different tests to take to see what it is that their disability or symptomatic behavior is. And then it's determined what kind of place they're put into. To do that, the IEP team will meet. That must have a school administrator there. It always has a classroom teacher there. Often a school counselor is involved. The parent, and when appropriate, the child is involved. We're talking about children being involved, just like in psychosocial rehabilitation. We want the client involved in what's going to happen in their life and help set up what they're willing to work with and how they're going to be able to function better. This has to be done within 60 days, and we went over those requirements. And you'll also find those rules in IDEA. So I want you to go back and look over them. These are legal documents, both the 504 policy and the IEP. Legally binding documents. You must follow them or be in violation of federal law. And some of you that I've had as students, and I've been to IEPs for you or your children, and we've fought some battles with the schools in our area, and I kind of like that. That's kind of fun to do. I like it when somebody's doing the wrong thing and we catch them, especially when it comes to helping children. But in that IEP meeting, the school psychologist comes and presents their report. What did they find? What does the testing say? What does this student qualify for? What is their disability? And mental illness is a disability. Do not forget that. We don't call children, as I say, mentally ill. Conduct disorder, which is in the DSM-5, I hope, it's in the DSM-4, is children who are out of control. Those are not mentally ill children. They're out of control kids, and they're deadly to work with. Little ones, you don't know what to do. They're very confusing because they won't obey you. They won't do what you say. They run out of the classroom. They run out of your house. They climb out the windows. They're rude. They maybe attack you, but that does not make them mentally ill. It means there's something going on, and how do you help them learn to control that behavior? The IEP has a whole lot to do with how the school handles it. If the school has an IEP on a student, the services that are called for through the IEP process, whether it's psychological services, receiving counseling, putting them in a group home, putting them into a foster home, removing them from their home, just a myriad of those kinds of things. All of those things are done through the IEP process. And once that's an IEP and signed by all the parties who attend, then that is a binding document, and it is the role of the school to pay for those services. And it can be very, very expensive. That's why there is special funding under No Child Left Behind and through IDEA to pay for what happens with these services that go on. So what I'm talking to you about today has to do with IEPs, student study teams, and 504 policies, and trying to get you to understand that it sounds really easy that you're going to save kids. I thought, oh boy, I'm going to go and work with kids and I'm going to save them all. Those parents have no clue what they're doing with these children, and boy, am I going to fix that. Then I had kids of my own, and I discovered that I don't have any answers. Nope, they proved me wrong, and they will prove all of us wrong. It takes a lot of time, patience, and energy to work with kids who often do not understand why they're out of control, why they're depressed, why they're suicidal, why all of these things are going on in their lives. And medication is not the answer to all of it. So these few terms that I gave you today are reiterating what you've already heard a little bit of. But I want you to remember these terms, and I would like you to read about them because they're also mentioned in your book. The reason why I like this author is because he's a California psychiatrist, pediatric psychiatrist, and this is his father. And so he knows California law, but this is federal law also. And you must follow the rules with the school, have your IEPs, and set up programs for children. You cannot do children's services without being right smack dab in the middle of the school. The school must be involved. Yes, if you're wealthy or have just really, really good insurance, you can pay to get the extra help. But you pay for it. It's paid either through the insurance that you pay for, or it's paid through your personal funding. So if you want the maximum of help for your child or somebody else's child, then you must involve going through PL 94-142 and its reauthorization under IDEA. So go back to start here and read that document and get familiar with it. And then be the expert. When people ask you, where do you start when you're working with kids? You start with the schools. The schools are your very, very best resource on learning how to work with children. Some of you may disagree with that, but I defy you to do it without their help. So call me, talk to me, discuss it with me, argue with me. That's how we'll both learn, and I hope you like doing this as much as I do. But it's good to know what you're talking about. And I would love to have each of you sit in on an IEP or a student study team, or looking at a 504 policy. And as I say, in the future, if you want to do that, I can help you with that. Mrs. Smalling, I'm sure, would be more than glad to have you on her school site and walk you through some of that. We can get you, those are all confidential, but we can get you permission to do it. Anyway, have a good day. I hope all your summer's going well, and I'll talk to you some more soon.